I slept, like a long time. I don't even know how long I slept. Neither do my parents. Whenever I finally woke up from my sleep, I saw my parents dressed up formally, standing proudly in my room. I rolled my head in my pillow before opening my eyes and beginning to speak to my parents. "What are you guys dressed up for?" I asked, rubbing my eyes and taking a sip of water from the glass on my nightstand. "The circus, of course," said my mom in her usual joyful voice. "Haven't been to one of those in years." "Is there a reason why you guys came into my room?" I asked, confused. "We were going to get you up so you can come with us to the circus. I'm sure your friends want to go too," said my mom. She picked up my phone and showed me all the missed notifications from my friends. The time showed 8:34 a.m. I thought it was way later. The sun was unusually bright today, but that was probably just me. Rolling out of bed, it hit me. How did Christopher and Joshua get saved? Where was Adeline? I vaguely remembered Clyde talking to me about them, but I couldn't quite recall the details. "We'll be waiting for you in the car. Just get yourself dressed and brush your teeth." "Brush your teeth," said my mom, leaving my room. I looked outside of my window. There was some weird haze in the sky, making the sun brighter than usual. My room looked slightly different, but I ignored it. My body was covered in bandages from Adeline, so getting dressed was a bit of a challenge. I wore a blue t-shirt and some ripped jeans. After brushing my teeth, I rushed downstairs and made it outside. My hair was messy, but I was feeling a lot better than before. The birds weren't chirping outside today like usual. I found that quite odd. My mom rolled down the passenger side window and shouted, "Leo, we are about to leave without you. Let's get going." I opened the car door and hopped inside. My mom put the car in reverse and pulled out of the driveway. "How are you feeling, Leo?" asked my dad, eating a biscuit. "Feeling quite good," I replied, my voice slightly coarse still. "What did you do to get in this bad of a condition?" my mom asked, perplexed. "It's a long story. I don't think I'm able to tell you everything that happened in the length of this car ride," I said. "Right then," replied my mom firmly. "You can tell me later then." After my mom finished sipping her water, the sound of nothing but the car engine rearing could be heard. The traffic this morning was unusually different compared to normal. I'm sure it was because of the circus. That sun, though, why was it so bright today? And that unexplainable feeling like a bug was crawling on me, it just wasn't right. My dad pulled into the parking lot of the fairgrounds a little while later. Traffic was worse than we thought, and we almost got into a couple of car crashes trying to get here, but we were here after nearly an hour. "That was freaking hellish. I'm so glad we got out of that traffic unscathed," sighed my dad, taking out the car keys, which subsequently led to the car shutting off. My mom opened the passenger door and stepped out. She seemed horrified throughout the whole drive, but she was just as relieved as my dad. I got out of the car and started walking up to the fair. "I haven't been able to go on many rides, so I hope I can go on more today. Later today," I said. "You didn't? You were there for a couple hours. I thought you went on multiple rides," exclaimed my mom, surprised. I looked in front of me. This was one of the largest crowds of people I had ever seen, right around the entrance of the fair. Then something else hit me really hard. Where was Adeline, Christopher, and Joshua? We'll be waiting in this line getting our tickets, but I'm sure you can go straight to the entrance and be accepted into the fair," said my mom. "You still have your ticket, right?" I looked at my mom absently. "I think I either threw it away or lost it," I replied. My mom rolled her eyes. She looked at me with a Herculean type of smile, one that I had never seen anyone else but her do. "We'll buy you another ticket then," she ascertained. I nodded in affirmation. That aching feeling of waiting in that atrocious line made me sick. If Joshua, Christopher, and Adeline were at the fair, would they be gone by the time I finally got inside the fair? "I'll take him into the fair." My parents, including me, looked behind us in shock. This boy whom I faintly remember was standing right in front of us with a very small smile on his face. "My name's Clyde," Clyde said kindly. "Hey, I've heard of that name before," said my dad, his tone of voice becoming one I barely ever hear. "Yeah, no kidding about that, honey," said my mother jokingly. "He's the youngest secret agent secretary over at City Hall." "Secret agent secretary over at City Hall? The youngest one there? How come I had never heard of him before then?" I gave him a blank look. My parents and Clyde were talking quietly. I noticed that the fair was painted in a different color than when I first went here. It was painted in white and red, probably for the circus, but that was one detail that certainly caught my eye. One thing I noticed while I was waiting was the amount of people looking at me. I guess that made sense. I looked like a mummy out in public. "Right then, we hope to see you guys after the circus," said my mom in a loud voice after finishing speaking with Clyde. I turned around and saw Clyde handshake them before Clyde turned his attention to me. "Let's go, Leo," he said in his leadership type tone. "Have fun, Leo," shouted my mom, waving goodbye. I looked right at the fair. That Ferris wheel was looking lovely. The dazzling lights glimmered even during broad daylight. Absolutely fantastic and memorable. Clyde and I had to run through the loud crowds, nearly getting lost at times. These crowds seemed almost endless, but after getting through them, we were immediately let through the gates after Clyde showed his ID card. I guess anyone with a City Hall ID card can cut this line. "What ride do you want to go on?" asked Clyde joyfully. The number of people looking at me was becoming unbearable. "Hold your horses," I said. "What day even is it?" "Tuesday, June 18th, 2019, Clyde replied immediately. "Anything else you need to ask?" "What the heck? Tuesday, June 18th? Am I dreaming?" Yeah, certainly," I said while stuttering in between words. "Ask away. Bumper cars, right?" said Clyde. "How did you know that my favorite ride is bumper cars? There's no fathomable way you could know that without spying on me or something." After he said that, I completely forgot the questions that I wanted to ask him. "I guess," I replied, trying to be cordial with this Clyde person. Clyde took off running. He was running right in the direction of the bumper cars. I took off following him. Those booths from the 14th were still there, and all the rides were there from then too. The only difference I could spot was a massive white and red tent set up right to the right of the fairgrounds. I was assuming that was the circus, which turned out to be correct. Even though I and Clyde ran across the entire fair, going to the bumper cars, I didn't see a single face I recognized. Even though it was only around 9:50 a.m., this place was extremely crowded. After a bit more running, we made it to the Validity-looking entrance. Oh, how it gave any visitor such a good impression. Those neon colors with the bold letters on the top making out the word bumper cars could excite anyone. "Leo, you're still with me, right?" shouted Clyde into the crowd. I tapped his shoulder. He turned around. "I'm right here, Clyde," I said. "Ready for the ride?" asked Clyde. "You bet I am," I replied with enthusiasm. I missed that old part of myself, my true enthusiastic self before everything happened. Clyde stepped into the line. I was behind him. The line was short, and usually it's super long. I wouldn't blame anyone for the ordinary long lines, though. This is one of the best experiences anyone can have in Greenfield. "So, why were you in the forest?" I asked Clyde a few moments later. "The forest?" said Clyde, confused. "Yes, the forest. You were in the bushes," I replied. "Sorry, but I don't really remember that," said Clyde. He sounded genuinely confused, but how? "I can tell you about Mr. Franklin if you're comfortable with that." Now, this was what I wanted to hear about. The only issue is that I couldn't get the side of his story when he was in the forest. That was stupid. "Yeah, sure," I replied. "Since you didn't answer all of my questions, we'll have to answer them after we're done with our visit to the fair," said Clyde. "But anyways, you know who Gabriel is, right?" "Gabriel, I've heard of that name before, but I don't think I know him," I replied in full honesty. "He used to work for Mayor Xavier, but immediately turned his back on all of us," said Clyde. "He actually was the one who helped greatly with resolving the Mr. Franklin ordeal." "Then why would he turn his back on the mayor?" I asked. "Exactly. Why would he?" replied Clyde. "He was a very smart dude, and we're thinking something happened, like bribery, larceny, or—" "Next!" yelled the tall man right in front of us. Clyde and I looked up. This man who was the ride operator was like a real-life giant. He was so tall. "You guys are next in line. Step up and get your heights measured," said the man. His voice sounded grumpy for whatever reason. Clyde got his height measured. 5'7" was his height. I got my height measured, and we were admitted to the ride. Entering, I saw the bright, flashing neon lights inside. That atmosphere made by those lights is so unforgettable. "Bumper cars are so freaking fun," I said in excitement. "They're definitely a good one," said Clyde in a dull voice. "But back to what I was saying about Gabriel. I think he turned his back against us because he thought of Mr. Franklin as some adjudicator. "What about the paper I saw?" I asked, knowing that was a fatal mistake. Fatal mistake to ask that. Clyde looked at me, almost giving me a death stare. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "The mayor never wrote that. He wrote another letter, but sadly Mr. Franklin got a hold of it, and now they know that they have full clearance to go into City Hall." The loud sound of the bumper cars rang through my ears as the silence between Clyde and I began. "Do you know when they will show up at City Hall?" I asked. "No one does, but we're assuming that they'll show up tomorrow or sometime this evening," Clyde replied. This was becoming way too stressful. "Well, let's just stop talking about this. It's getting on my nerves," I abruptly said. "I can say the same thing," said Clyde. "Let's have some fun on these rides." sometime later. After the fun times on the Ferris wheel and other games and rides at the fair, we took a break. Joshua, Christopher, and Adeline weren't anywhere. Clyde and I couldn't find them. The last thing to do here was go to the circus. The first show of the circus was beginning shortly, which is partly why we took a break from all the games and rides. One of the many things they do at the circus on a yearly basis is bring highly intelligent monkeys on stage to entertain the audience. Adeline told us one time that one of those monkeys stole a bracelet she had, and she hasn't gotten that bracelet back. Even though Adeline said that it was very important to her, I hope that one of the monkeys did something like that to me. Another one of the tricks they perform yearly is anxiety-inducing stunts on stage. Rumors always go around the city after the circus yearly that someone had to be sent out because they had a heart attack, but I doubt those are ever true. Walking to the circus, we noticed that the crowds became almost unbearable. We constantly kept getting pushed around, bumped, and almost got an ice cream cone thrown at us. It landed on someone else, and they had to immediately leave the fair. I wonder where your friends are. I could have sworn I saw them while I was waiting for you, said Clyde. If you can't find them now, I'll make sure to find them after the circus, and don't worry, they are all perfectly fine. I looked at Clyde with a soft smile. That's good, I replied. We quickly approached the tent that hosted the circus. Crowds were pouring into the entrance like water pouring down a drain. It was absolutely incredible, yet noisy. That was another problem that I remember very vividly from last year's circus. I heard that since this is the circus's 40th anniversary in Greenfield, they're going to perform a special show with the mayor this year, said Clyde as we made our way to the entrance of the tent. And I'm sure this performance is going to be like no other, I said with confidence. I was certainly not wrong about that. The inside of the tent was way more different than I originally thought. It looked like a solid building from the inside, but everyone knew it was a tent. The floor was covered in thick wood with intricate patterns, and a warm light bathed the place. Many chairs were lined up in straight rows, was what most of the tent's interior contained. A massive deep red curtain covering the stage from view was located in the far back of the tent, lying in silence. Let's try getting a front row seat, said Clyde, running up to the central aisle and bumping into almost everyone. I tried keeping up, but I quickly lost Clyde in the crowd. How could he keep running in these crowds so quickly? I soon got to the front row of the auditorium and found Clyde sitting close by. He was looking at me, softly smiling. Sit right next to me over here, said Clyde, pointing to an empty seat that was to the left of him. I briskly walked over to the seat he was pointing at and sat down next to him. These chairs were slightly uncomfortable, but it didn't matter. I noticed that at the bottom of the stage, we were sitting within 6 feet of the stage. There were letters imprinted into the wood. I couldn't quite tell what the letters read out, but they were coated in a really nice silver. We probably had to wait about 10 minutes for the show to begin, but during that time, Clyde and I just talked about other things. After sitting in silence, watching the crowd settle down as they found seats, the lights started to dim. This was it. The beginning of the circus was here. The curtain to the stage opened up, revealing a man dressed very flauntily. He had a black hat on and also had a very large mustache. That mustache was probably fake, but no one could notice that. The man grabbed the microphone to stand, and everyone began clapping. Welcome, everyone, to the 40th annual Greenfield Circus, said the flaunt man in a very ecstatic tone. The audience cheered very loudly with some ovation. We will be performing our first act of the flaunt man started speaking abruptly. Silence filled the place, and whispers began across the politely silent auditorium. Another man, quickly dressed in ripped clothing, ran out onto the stage, snatched the microphone, and whispered something into the man's ear. The man in a flaunt outfit looked at the other man, nodded, grabbed the microphone, and tapped on it before speaking again. Sorry about that. There was actually a change of plans, everybody. We are actually doing some other acts first. The man was speaking unnaturally now. This is getting a bit suspicious, whispered Clyde. He was kind of right. I still kept my eyes on the stage. My heart was racing with anticipation. The sound of ruffling behind the stage started right before a myriad of classical music began playing, which completely silenced any noise coming from behind the stage. A very handsome man came out from the darkness of the stage. He had a very nice singing voice. The stage light shone down on him beautifully as he started singing a melody. I'd never seen this man before, and I don't think anyone knew his name. After his performance was done, an interlude sequence played on the stage of The Three Little Pigs. The models set up on the stage were absolutely fantastic. Then the next act started. Juggling. This wasn't any ordinary juggling, though. The jugglers had been trained for years and were juggling so many items at once while singing a song. The audience was in awe at their skills. Nobody in the audience could do the activities being performed on the stage at that moment. Along with that, there were amazing stunts, magician tricks, and the last one that was my personal favorite, the monkeys. They jumped up to the bars hanging from the roof, and using them, they went around the entire auditorium while the crowd was screaming in excitement. The monkeys were dropping pink flowers everywhere, making the room look like a flowery oasis. I managed to pick one of the flowers up, which I lost about 5 seconds later. After the monkeys regrouped together on the stage, the man who started off the show at the beginning went to take a hold of the microphone. I'm a little confused as to why we haven't seen Mayor Xavier on stage yet, whispered Clyde. Thank you all for sticking around to watch this show, said the font man. His voice sounded very happy and ecstatic. I'm pleased to present to you all the last act of this show. The big curtains closed and the sound of a microphone dropping loudly rang through everyone's ears in the auditorium. Sounds of hooting from the audience started and the booming sound of a large door closing could be heard. Any outside light that was spilling into the auditorium wasn't visible anymore. The audience stopped making sounds. Everyone could hear the sound of chains and locks in the front entrance. Are they locking us up? Are they locking us in here? I whispered with deep confusion. Clyde turned around. Probably not, but if they do, I have one of my own keys to this building, so we'll be fine, he whispered back arrogantly. Building? I thought this was a tent, I whispered in a surprised manner. Whatever, said Clyde, louder than a whisper now. They're opening the curtains up. Keep your eye on the stage. The big red curtains opened slowly. I couldn't see much because the stage lights were off. I could smell a very faint scent of smoke. Smell that too? Asked Clyde quietly. I looked at him and nodded. Looking back up at the stage, the lights flickered on and no one was up there. Then, as I looked away, about to talk to Clyde, the whole audience gasped in horror. Sobs and yells emerged from the one silent audience. I looked back to the stage and saw that someone who looked like Mayor Xavier was completely dead, hanging upside down from a rope. He was hung above a fiery pit, and another man who resembled Mr. Franklin was standing right next to the body. Everyone was screaming in horror, some running around and others sitting in their chairs, bawling. I got him first, Clyde. Mr. Franklin quivered in a sickly voice through the microphone. After Mr. Franklin spoke, I heard thumps of footsteps on the staircase leading up to the stage. I looked to my right and noticed that Clyde wasn't sitting next to me anymore. Cold air was in place of Clyde. I began panicking and immediately began to tiptoe up the side staircase that I presume Clyde went up on. I nearly slipped on the amount of flowers lying on the floor. He languished in our city. How can you guys consider him as your mayor? Mr. Franklin said, his microphone still clenched into his hand. As I was about to land my foot on the stage, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me down the staircase a couple steps. It was Clyde who pulled me down. Don't try to make our presence known, all right? Clyde whispered though mostly silenced over my heavy breathing and his fast beating heart. But what about? Clyde shut me up by putting his hand over my mouth. Mr. Franklin began to speak again. I overthrew this circus because Mayor overthrew my circus, Mr. Franklin continued. I felt my saliva thicken up when I heard that. How did Mr. Franklin overthrow the circus, and what was he planning to do now? I'm going to push Mr. Franklin over so we can hopefully save Mayor Xavier, Clyde whispered calmly as he lifted his hand from my mouth. But isn't he dead? I said, my voice heavily muffled from Clyde's hand. Clyde went from a crouching position to a stood-up position. Mr. Franklin continued to speak, singing a crappy lullaby in his delusional state. I slowly followed Clyde as he crept up to the floor of the stage. I crept my head around the corner and saw that person, Mr. Franklin. He was dressed in a tuxedo and was slowly dancing around next to the fiery pit. Clyde turned around before stepping up on the stage. Stay crouched back here and don't move or make a sound, Clyde commanded. I'm going to push him into the fire, and that's when you can step foot on the stage. I nodded quietly. Clyde nodded after I nodded before he turned around and started walking to Mr. Franklin. Anyhow, I'm extremely close to cutting this rope, said Mr. Franklin, his eyes becoming bloodshot. Or will you? Clyde said loudly. Mr. Franklin stopped dancing, now frozen in place. He turned his entire body to face Clyde. A shiny blade was held in Mr. Franklin's hand. You don't go killing or mocking any one of our city hall members, Clyde said. You will pay for your actions. As sudden as Clyde's speaking was, Mr. Franklin's limb movements were even more sudden. He lifted his hand up and dug his blade right into Clyde's face. Clyde screamed in agony as the blade continued to dig into his face. Stop! Clyde yelled. He continued screaming in pain. Stop it now. Mr. Franklin dropped the blade. Clyde was miraculously still alive, though he wasn't speaking. I stood up from behind the staircase, revealing my presence to Mr. Franklin. I went to stand erect, adjacent to Clyde, completely frozen in place. "So, Leo's here too," Mr. Franklin mumbled. Clyde collapsed to the ground after Mr. Franklin spoke. I immediately took back what I said earlier. Clyde was miraculously still alive. That couldn't be true anymore. He had to be dead by this point. There was no way he was alive. In a frantic motion, I shoved Mr. Franklin to the pit of fire. He knocked his head into the dead body of Mayor Xavier before completely collapsing into the fire. He started screaming in pain, each rhythmic scream ringing through the auditorium. I looked down and saw the horrific state Clyde was in. His face looked completely unrecognizable. A deep scar was dug into the left side of his face, and his face was covered in blood. I had a feeling that he was still alive, however.